A powerful police chief orders a woman out of court, convinced she's just another nuisance. But when she raises an FBI badge, the room falls silent. What secret is she about to expose? As she reveals shocking evidence of his corruption, his confidence shatters. Will he escape justice, or has his past finally caught up to him? The courtroom watches in suspense. No one saw this coming. The courtroom was tense as Police Chief Richard Calloway pointed at the woman standing before him, his voice loud and commanding. "Get her out of here," he ordered, expecting immediate obedience. The room fell silent, all eyes on the woman as security moved toward her. But instead of stepping back, she reached into her pocket and held up an FBI badge for everyone to see. The energy in the room shifted instantly. Calloway's confident expression vanished, his face turning pale. Then she spoke 5 words that sent shockwaves through the courtroom. "You are under federal arrest." What had this powerful officer done? How had he not seen this coming? The courtroom erupted in whispers as the weight of the moment sank in. Stay with us, because this story will leave you speechless. Do you think powerful people should be above the law? Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more real-life justice stories. This isn't just about one arrest. It's a fight for truth, justice, and exposing corruption where it hides. Ava Carter sat quietly in the crowded courtroom, her posture poised, her expression unreadable. At just 30 years old, she had already built a formidable reputation in federal investigations. Years of working undercover had sharpened her instincts, teaching her patience, strategy, and the art of striking at the perfect moment. For months, she had been collecting evidence against a network of corrupt officers, and today she was finally ready to expose them. She wasn't here for spectacle or revenge. She was here for justice. Across the room, Police Chief Richard Calloway sat with his usual air of arrogance. Decorated with awards and respected by many, he had spent decades building a career that looked flawless from the outside. But behind the uniform, he was a man who had manipulated the system for years, covering up crimes, silencing whistleblowers, and protecting the worst of his kind. His power came not just from his title, but from the fear he instilled in others. No one dared to challenge him, and he had every reason to believe that today would be no different. The courtroom was packed, buzzing with anticipation over the high-profile murder trial unfolding. Journalists lined the benches, their cameras flashing as attorneys presented their arguments. Lawyers whispered among themselves, witnesses fidgeted, and members of the public leaned forward in their seats, eager for the next revelation. But Ava wasn't here for the trial itself. She was here for something much bigger. She watched and waited, knowing that the moment was coming when everything would change. Calloway's sharp gaze scanned the room, and the second he spotted Ava, his expression hardened. He didn't know who she was, but something about her presence unsettled him. A woman like her, sitting alone, focused and unmoved by the commotion. She wasn't just a concerned citizen. He assumed she was another troublemaker, a protester, looking to cause disruption. With a quick nod, he signaled to the bailiff, and within moments, 2 uniformed officers began making their way toward her. The tension in the room thickened as security closed in, but Ava remained calm. She didn't flinch, didn't move, didn't even acknowledge the officers approaching. She simply sat, hands resting on her lap, waiting. She knew exactly what was about to happen, and she was ready. Ava rose to her feet, her movements slow and deliberate, commanding attention without a single word. The murmurs in the courtroom died down as all eyes turned toward her. Clearing her throat, she spoke with quiet authority, her voice carrying through the tense air. Your Honor, I have evidence relevant to a federal corruption case directly tied to this trial. I request permission to present it before this court. Before the judge could respond, Police Chief Richard Calloway scoffed loudly, pushing himself up from his chair. This is nonsense, he snapped, his voice laced with irritation. She has no legal right to speak in this courtroom. His eyes narrowed as he glared at Ava, unwilling to let her take control of the room. The judge hesitated, looking between Ava and Calloway, clearly unsure of how to proceed. Ava remained unfazed. She could feel the weight of the moment, the tension, rising with every passing second. Calloway, emboldened by the judge's uncertainty, took another step forward and barked, "Get her out of here, now!" His command rang through the courtroom and the bailiff immediately moved in, followed by two officers making their way toward Ava. A smug smirk curled on Calloway's lips as he folded his arms, convinced that this woman, whoever she was, had no real power. To him, she was nothing more than an overconfident nuisance, someone who had stepped into the wrong room with the wrong people. Ava didn't move. She didn't flinch as the officers came closer, their hands hovering near their belts, waiting for her to resist. Instead, she stood firm, eyes locked onto Calloway, unshaken by his attempt to control the situation. The audience leaned forward, sensing something was about to happen. Journalists exchanged whispers, their pens scribbling furiously while the judge finally spoke up, his voice sharp with impatience. "Miss Carter, I need an explanation now," he demanded. Ava exhaled slowly before speaking, her tone steady, unyielding. "You are obstructing a federal investigation." The room fell dead silent. The officers, just inches away from her, froze, in their tracks. Calloway's smirk vanished, his arrogance replaced by sudden confusion. The judge leaned back slightly, his brows furrowing as he processed her words. The weight of what she had just said hit the courtroom like a shockwave. Ava let the silence linger, allowing the realization to settle. Calloway had made a grave mistake, and he was about to find out just how much power she truly had. Ava reached into her pocket with deliberate slowness, her fingers brushing against the cold metal. The courtroom remained silent, the tension thick enough to suffocate. Then, in one swift motion, she pulled out a badge and raised it high for everyone to see. Ava Carter, FBI Special Agent. The collective gasp from the courtroom was instant. The judge's eyes widened, journalists scrambled to write, and the murmurs in the audience grew louder. But no reaction was more satisfying than the one across from her. The smugness drained from Police Chief Richard Calloway's face, his once confident smirk replaced by something else, uncertainty. He shifted his weight, as if the ground beneath him had suddenly become unsteady. The bailiff, who had been inches away from grabbing Ava's arm, stopped cold. His hands hovered in the air before he instinctively took a step back, realizing the gravity of the situation. The security officers, who had been following Calloway's orders without question, exchanged nervous glances. The judge, now fully alert, straightened in his seat, his voice sharper than before. "Miss Carter, what exactly is going on here?" Ava took her time before answering, letting the weight of her presence settle over the room. She met Calloway's eyes, watching as doubt and panic flickered in them. Then, with a voice calm and unwavering, she spoke. "This court is being used to cover up years of corruption, and the man standing before you is at the center of it all." Calloway scoffed, his face reddening, his voice faltering for the first time. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. He turned toward the judge, attempting to regain his authority. "Your Honor, she's lying. This woman is here to disrupt these proceedings with false accusations." But Ava was already reaching into her briefcase, unfazed. She pulled out a thick folder and stepped forward. "Let me make it simple for you, Chief," she said, flipping open the first page. She laid out bank transactions linking Calloway to multiple bribes from known criminals. She presented falsified police reports, burying evidence that should have put dangerous people behind bars. She revealed whistleblower testimonies, officers who had tried to speak up but had been silenced under Calloway's reign. Case by case, document by document, she unraveled years of deceit in front of a stunned courtroom. The murmurs grew into outright gasps. Journalists scribbled furiously, their cameras clicking non-stop. Even the judge, a man who had likely seen his fair share of legal chaos, leaned forward with intrigue, flipping through the documents with a deep frown. Calloway clenched his jaw, his composure slipping fast. He knew the walls were closing in, but still he refused to go down without a fight. "This is a setup, a lie," he barked, his voice losing its edge as he turned wildly toward the judge. "This woman is trying to ruin my career with fabricated evidence." Ava didn't flinch. She simply smiled, the way a predator does when they know their prey has already lost. "That's funny," she said, tilting her head slightly. "Because the FBI doesn't issue arrest warrants without proof." Calloway froze. The weight of her words sank in just as the doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. 2 federal agents stepped inside, their expressions unreadable, their presence absolute. The tension reached its peak as the entire room turned to watch them approach. Ava took one final step toward Calloway, lowering her voice just enough for only him to hear. "Bailiff, stand down," she instructed, her eyes locked onto his. "Federal agents are already waiting outside." Calloway's face turned an impossible shade of white as the realization dawned. He wasn't walking out of here a free man. His time had finally run out. Ava let the silence linger for a moment before reaching into her briefcase one last time. The courtroom, already breathless with shock, watched as she pulled out a small, sleek recording device. She held it up for everyone to see before pressing play. A voice crackled through the speakers, Calloway's voice. "This case is dead. Make sure the evidence disappears." The room stiffened. Calloway's head snapped toward the device, his face drained of color. "Dinky." "DT," audio continued, his voice unmistakable. "You'll get your cut, just keep your men quiet. No one questions my orders and walks away clean." Gasps erupted throughout the courtroom. The judge, who had been sifting through Ava's documents with a hardened expression, now slowly lifted his gaze. His jaw tightened, his patience evaporating. "Enough," the judge said, his voice cold with finality. He turned his sharp gaze toward Calloway. "This court has heard sufficient evidence. You have been lying under oath, obstructing justice, and engaging in criminal conspiracy. This ends now." Calloway opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked around frantically, searching for an escape, a lifeline, anything that could pull him out of this nightmare. But there was nothing. The courtroom had shifted. Just moments ago he had commanded authority. Now he was nothing more than a man trapped in his own web of deceit, his years of corruption exposed for all to see. His breathing grew heavy, panic flashing in his eyes. "This is all a setup," he sputtered, his voice barely a whisper. "I didn't." Click. The sound of handcuffs snapping shut around his wrists silenced him instantly. A federal agent stepped forward, gripping Calloway's arms as he pulled him away from the podium. The once powerful chief struggled briefly, but it was useless. His time was up. The room was frozen in stunned silence. Journalists scrambled to capture every detail, their pens flying across notepads. Some members of the audience exchanged wide-eyed glances, while others simply watched in disbelief. A man who had spent years ruling over others with unchecked power was now just another criminal being led away in cuffs. Through it all, Ava stood motionless, her face unreadable, her job done. Justice had finally been served. As the heavy courtroom doors swung shut behind the disgraced police chief Richard Calloway, a murmur spread through the crowd like ripples in water. The once untouchable officer, the man who had ruled with unchecked power, had been taken down in front of the entire world. But for Ava Carter, this was just one victory in a much larger fight. She didn't smile, didn't celebrate, because she knew that corruption didn't begin or end with one man. There were others, hidden in the shadows, believing they were untouchable, and she was coming for them next. The fallout from Calloway's arrest was immediate. The media erupted with headlines exposing the deep-rooted corruption in law enforcement, reporters digging into every case he had ever touched. Whistleblowers who had once been silenced found the courage to speak out. Officers who had looked the other way were now scrambling to cover their tracks. And just as Ava had expected, Calloway was not alone. One by one, names began surfacing, each linked to fraud, bribery, and cover-ups. It was like watching dominoes fall, a long-overdue reckoning sweeping through the department. Some officers resigned in disgrace, others were investigated, and a handful were arrested before they had the chance to run. Outside the courthouse, the crowd had grown. Protesters, journalists, and everyday citizens gathered, some holding signs, demanding accountability, others simply watching in awe. Ava stepped out into the cool evening air, the weight of the case still heavy on her shoulders. The cameras flashed as reporters threw questions at her, but she ignored them, walking down the courthouse steps with steady determination. As she reached the sidewalk, an older man standing among the crowd called out to her. "Why do you do this?" he asked, his voice filled with curiosity. Ava stopped, turning to look at him. She thought about all the cases she had worked on, all the people who had suffered under corrupt officials like Calloway. She thought about the victims who had been ignored, the evidence that had been buried, the families who had never received justice. And then, with quiet certainty, she answered, "Because no one is above the law." And with that, she walked away, knowing that her job was far from over. Justice isn't about power. It's about truth. No matter how long corruption hides in the shadows, the truth always comes out. Richard Calloway thought he was untouchable, that his position would shield him forever. But when faced with undeniable evidence, even he couldn't escape accountability. His downfall was a reminder that no matter how high someone climbs, justice will always catch up. What do you think? Do you believe in real justice? Should powerful figures be held accountable, no matter their status? Share your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear from you. And if you believe in stories that expose corruption and fight for justice, make sure to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more. Because in the end, no one outruns justice forever.